6, the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Finance, does he stand by his statement to the House yesterday that the budget projects wages to grow faster than inflation, and if so, how does he explain the table on page 160 of budget documents B.2 and B.3?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, yes, I absolutely do stand by that statement. The table in question shows the Treasury's projections of pre-tax wage growth and inflation out to 2014. During this period, wages are projected to grow by over 14%, somewhat higher than inflation. This table does not take personal tax reductions into account. The growth in after-tax wages will be larger in 2010-11 because of the income tax cuts. That's why the same table shows real private consumption expenditure rising by almost 3% in that year. And in fact, over the 4 years to 2014, the Treasury projections show household disposable incomes from all sources and after tax increasing by over 25%. That's consistent with the projections that show 170,000 net new jobs being created.
Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, given that inflation in the next year is 5.9% and wage growth only 2.4%, can he confirm that it takes until 2014 for wage growth to keep up with inflation?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, I don't accept the premise in the member's question on behalf of the Minister of Finance because he fails to take into account the effect of personal tax reductions in October 1st of this year. So you can't just sit there and say CPI inflation goes up at this rate and wage rises go up at this rate and ignore the effect of personal tax reductions.
The Honourable
Speaker, point of order.
Point of order,
Mr. Speaker, I seek your guidance on whether it's possible for the Minister simply to, instead of answering the question, to reject it while it was in the same terms as the primary set down on notice, which was absolutely about wages.
No, I think I listened very carefully. I've got to say the Minister, in my view, answered the question perfectly fairly. He pointed out there was information that wasn't included in the member asked in the information the member asking the question was putting forward, and he's perfectly at liberty to do that. The Honourable David Cunliffe.
To the Minister, how does he square his assurance to the House yesterday that wages will outstrip inflation with the Minister of State Services statement the same day that, quote, it's pleasing to see the government's expectations of restraint are being heard?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I think you'll find that the Minister of State Services was referring to public sector wage inflation, which of course has in recent times been considerably higher than private sector wage inflation.
Pesada Sam Lotu-Iiga.
Mr. Speaker. Supplementary question to the Minister. How will Budget 2010 improve the incomes of New Zealanders?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the sustained lift in real disposable incomes that I mentioned will see the average household about $7,000 a year better off. This comes from a range of sources. Some of it comes from the budget measures, which means taxpayers at all income levels receive a tax cut larger than the extra GST that they pay. Some of it comes from the cut in the company tax rate, which will allow businesses to invest more and pay greater dividends. But most of it comes from getting the economy growing again, creating those 170,000 jobs and getting New Zealand back to work.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
To the Minister, why should New Zealanders trust his word when he's now admitted that his tax calculator understated inflation, that he's misled them on wages and prices, and that he's broken his promise not to borrow additional funds for high-income tax cuts?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce. Point of order, is it the Honourable Rodney Hyde?
I listened most carefully to the member's question, and I think everyone in the country appreciates, Mr. Speaker, you requiring ministers to answer questions properly when put clearly. But there's also a quid pro quo, and that is that questions should also meet a standard. And what we've just seen is a tactic of a Member of Parliament standing up to ask a question, stating things, here's what this minister has admitted, none of which, I can assure you, having sat here and not been an interested party, any minister has accepted at all. And I would say that if you're going to hold ministers to account to a high standard of answer, you also have to hold members of Parliament to a high standard of question.
Order. Oh, no, I don't think I need assistance on this. No, I don't need assistance on this. The member's raised a perfectly fair point of order. I absolutely accept that. And the member's right that often questions don't conform with standing orders the way perhaps could be expected. But the view I've taken is rather than inject the Speaker too much into question time, the view I've taken is where a member asks a question that is pretty marginal with respect to standing orders, the Minister's got licence then to answer it the way the Minister sees fit. And to my mind, that's the discipline on the person asking the question. They may get an answer they don't like if they ask that kind of question. And I could intervene endlessly and say, no, that bit of the question's out of order, but I'd rather not do that. I think it's better to leave the ministers. The ministers know. I think ministers see it every day, that where they can see where a question being asked is really pretty marginal with respect to standing orders. I'm not going to pull the minister up on the way they answer it. The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, I think I dimly recall that there were 3 questions in that question. I'd like to point out 2 things to the member which I think will address his questions. Firstly, the website obviously factors in the tax changes on 1 October and does not address forecast wage increases, falling unemployment or possible consumer prices changes. But Treasury expects, as per the table he originally cited in his primary question, that wage increases over the next 4 years will outstrip price increases, even including the impact of the GST change, and the personal tax deductions are on top of that, and the member needs to understand that.
Question number 7, Keith Locke.